Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
The writer and director of The Phantom Menace, George Lucas, has recently done an interview with StarWars.com about the film's negative reaction and talking about the film 20 years later. Now, there's a lot to be said in this interview. There's a lot of interviews going on, basically. They interviewed Doug Chiang, Ahmed Best, George Lucas, Rob Coleman, a lot of people who were involved with The Phantom Menace. And I don't want to go through all that. I mainly want to talk about what George has to say about the negative reaction and the backlash the film had, and looking at it in perspective and in hindsight 20 years later. Here's what they say in the Phantom Menace article. They say Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was released on May 19th, 1999. While it shattered box office records, the reception was mixed turned hostile, especially when it came to Jar Jar Binks. The backlash hit those behind the scenes. And then they talked to George Lucas about his thoughts on it, and he says, I always had faith, to be very honest with you. When it came out, we got blasted out of the water, and then the movies had this patina around it of failure and stupidity and whatever. The films were designed for 12-year-olds. I said that right from the very, very beginning, and the very first interviews I did for A New Hope. It's just that they were so popular with everybody that everybody forgot that. Then when I came back to The Phantom Menace, it was 20 years later. So if you were 10 years old when you saw A New Hope, you would be 30 years old when you saw The Phantom Menace. So you weren't a kid anymore. I think you were kind of embarrassed, and what you thought was a really fantastic movie for a 12-year-old wasn't that great for a grown-up. I think that was the main cause of the fall of episodes 1, 2, and 3. Believe me, it took a beating. Now, George is using the exact same argument that he's been using for the past 20 years to defend The Phantom Menace, and that is, you didn't like the film because you didn't understand it because you were an adult. You're not a kid. You can't enjoy it if you're trying to look at it through an adult's eyes. You know, you're supposed to enjoy it as a kid. I don't agree with that argument entirely, and the reason is because it wasn't only 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds who fell in love with A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. It was everybody. Parents, grandparents, you name them, adults, everyone liked the original trilogy. It wasn't just kids. And Lucas may not have fell in love with the original trilogy because it wasn't a complete film that he wanted it to be. He didn't get it. He didn't have complete creative control like he wanted it to. He was limited by technology. There was a lot of imperfections in the original trilogy that bug Lucas. And so when it comes to the prequel trilogy and he can do everything he wants and he's allowed to have full reign, he comes out with these slightly more childish films compared to the original trilogy. You know, they'll tone down until you get to Revenge of the Sith because it's rated PG-13. George is using that argument that, hey, it's for kids and that's why you didn't like it. I don't agree with that. I think if The Phantom Menace was a better film, everybody would have liked it. I think everybody in the audience would have enjoyed the film if it was meant for all audiences and it wasn't just geared towards kids. And he can say it was geared towards kids, but just because it was geared towards kids doesn't mean only kids fell in love with it. And I think that's a common debate that Star Wars fans are still going to have with its creator, George Lucas. But let's get to the next part of the article and the next thing he says. Now, this quote is probably more interesting, but it is more lengthy, so let's get into it. George Lucas says, the main thing they obviously got upset about was Jar Jar, but they got upset about Jar Jar because he was there for the kids. When I did A New Hope, everybody felt the same way about 3PO. They hated him. They thought he was too childish and the jokes were bad. They said the same thing. It's just the initial wave of Star Wars sort of overwhelmed the criticism of 3PO. We even played on that in Empire, making fun of him and acknowledging the fact that he was annoying. And then in the third one, we did the same thing with Ewoks. People just went berserk. They said it was horrible, it ruined the movie, and how can you watch this, and all that kind of stuff. So I was used to that sort of thing, but for some reason, the criticism through the internet became more alive, and the news media began to listen to the fans. Obviously, when a fan or a group or a blog says something terrible, they take it seriously, and suddenly that became the reality. It was very hard to turn back from that. The fact is, The Phantom Menace is actually about some different kind of things, and the story is a little more complex. I knew it would mean a lot to kids. I kept defending it by saying, this is for 12-year-olds and kids are going to love Jar Jar. I'm not surprised George is so adamant on defending the character of Jar Jar. It's one of those things where now whenever you talk about The Phantom Menace or the prequels with any of the fans in the Star Wars fandom, they always say, well, alright, we can talk about The Phantom Menace, and if you want to debate The Phantom Menace, sure, but don't mention Jar Jar. That's kind of how a lot of prequel fans say, you know, Jar Jar's annoying, but we're not going to talk about him. And let's be honest, Jar Jar is an annoying character, like 3PO, but 3PO's annoyance to me wasn't so forced. It wasn't the center of the dialogue in a way. Jar Jar is just overwhelmed with annoyance, in my opinion, and I don't hate the character. I do think the backlash towards him was a little undeserved. Is he annoying? Yes. Is he a good character? No. But do I mind him? He's just kind of there and he annoys me. He's like that annoying little kid at the playground that you're always friends with because, he's nice, don't get me wrong, he's a really nice kid, but he's annoying. And that's how I look at Jar Jar. And George defends Jar Jar because that's the first character he conceptualized for the Phantom Menace. That was the first thing he prioritized on, was Jar Jar. That was the first character that had artwork done and everything and all that stuff. This was the focus for the film, and I think that's where fans and George split. George wanted to focus on Jar Jar to make it funnier for kids that were 12 and enjoy it, and fans of old who grew up with the original trilogy were saying, hey, I'm glad you made this for the kids to enjoy, but don't forget that, my dad fell in love with Star Wars too back in the 70s and 80s, and so did my grandparents. Where's our Star Wars? And it's just different interpretations of Star Wars. This is always going to be one of the hardest arguments and debates that I have with the Star Wars movies in general. It's meant for kids, but yet adults fell in love with it, and it captured everyone's attention and imagination. It's not something, in my opinion, that is meant for kids only. It's something that I think captures the innocence of childhood in us all, but also speaks to, adults and other people on a more deeper level in terms of, you have this destiny, there's this mythology that you have with the original trilogy, there's this religious aspect to these films as well, and there's deeper meanings to it. I mean, even look at The Last Jedi, and despite all its flaws, there is some kind of deeper meaning to that film that Rian Johnson was trying to give off, that I would say it's not just meant for kids. It's something that a lot of adults would interpret the film a lot different than a 12-year-old would. So there's so many arguments that you can have and debates that you can have with this take that Lucas has, with this take that I have on it. And it's one of the harder conversations and arguments to have, in my opinion. But tell me your thoughts. What do you think? Is Star Wars meant for kids like Lucas says it is, or do you think it's meant for everybody? I personally, I take the side of it's meant for everyone, but it gears towards kids, but captures the innocence of childhood in us all. It's a hard conversation, in my opinion. But tell me your thoughts below. Make that hard conversation a more interesting one by giving me your feedback and having some more interesting debates in the comment section below. So tell me your thoughts below. I'm Star Wars Only. Hope you guys enjoy this video. I'll see y'all next time, and may the Force be with you always.